Is the predator a story, or is there a basis in truth? They say that every legend is born from a whisper of truth. Something small at first. A missing person. A strange sound deep in the woods. An empty campsite found just before the first snow. In the quiet mountains of Vermont, there's a place where stories never stay buried. The locals call it Glastonbury Mountain. A forest so vast and so silent that even the wind seems to avoid it. For decades, people have disappeared there without a trace. Some were hunters, some were hikers, some were just passing through. All of them were swallowed by the same stretch of wilderness that locals call the Bennington Triangle. The first time I heard about it, I thought it was just another campfire tale. You know the type. The kind shared by truckers and travelers, something to kill time during a storm. But the deeper I went, the stranger it got. Because the disappearances were real, and the details didn't make sense. It started in the late 1940s. A man named Mitty Rivers was leading a group of hunters through the woods near Glastonbury. He knew every inch of that forest, every hidden stream, every twisted route. But one afternoon, as the group made their way back toward camp, Mitty walked ahead on the trail. When the others turned the corner, he was gone. No sound, no sign of struggle, just gone. Searchers combed the area for days. They found nothing, not even his rifle. A year later, in 1946, a young college student named Paula Weldon decided to hike the Long Trail, a path that winds through those same mountains. Witnesses saw her start her hike alone, wearing a bright red jacket. She was smiling. The weather was clear, and she was never seen again. An entire army of volunteers searched the mountains. Even the FBI got involved. But Paula simply vanished. The newspapers called it a mystery without a body. And to this day, not a single piece of clothing, not a single clue has ever been found. Over the next few years, the disappearances continued. A man stepped off a bus and vanished between towns. An old woman went missing from her home, leaving a half-eaten dinner on the table. Each case was isolated, until someone realized that all of them had one thing in common. They were last seen near Glastonbury Mountain. Locals began to whisper about something hunting out there, something that didn't need tracks, didn't leave bodies, didn't make mistakes. They called it the predator. Most people said it was just superstition, that the missing had simply gotten lost or run away. But if that were true, why were so many of them experienced outdoorsmen? Why did search dogs lose the trail completely, as if the scent just ended in midair? And why, in some of the search reports, did rescuers mention hearing voices in the forest at night? Voices that sounded human calling their names, but coming from deep inside the woods, far beyond where any person could be. I spent months reading the reports, old newspapers, even local legends. One detail kept appearing: the cairns. Piles of stones stacked by unknown hands, hidden off the trails. Some say they were old markers left by early settlers. Others say they're memorials for those who never made it back. But the locals have another belief. They say the cairns are bait. They say if you disturb them, the predator will come for you. In 2019, a group of amateur hikers decided to film a documentary about the Bennington Triangle. They camped near an area known for strange disappearances. Their footage was later found near a stream several miles from where their tent had been. Only fragments of their recordings were intact. One of them shows a flashlight beam moving through the trees, a trembling voice saying, "I think it's following us." The next sound is a heavy breathing, not quite human. Then the camera cuts out. Authorities later found one boot and a torn backpack strap. No bodies were recovered. The official report listed them as missing, presumed dead. But locals didn't need a report. They already knew what had taken them. I drove there myself last summer. Just curiosity, I told myself. A journalist chasing a story. The road into Glastonbury is rough and empty. No gas stations, no phone signal, not even a sign welcoming you to town. Because there is no town anymore. The place was abandoned more than a century ago, after a series of strange deaths and a mining accident no one likes to talk about. Now it's just endless forest and silence. I parked near the start of the long trail. The trees were tall and unmoving. The air smelled of rain and iron. At first, it felt peaceful, but as I walked deeper, I began to notice things. The forest was too quiet. No birds, no insects, only my footsteps and the sound of my own breathing. After an hour, I found one of the cairns. It was taller than I expected, almost to my chest, built of smooth river stones. Some of the rocks were damp, but the topmost one was completely dry, as if someone had just placed it there. For a moment I stood there, wondering who had built it. And then from somewhere behind me, I heard a voice. A man's voice. It said, "Don't touch that." I turned around, but there was no one there. The trail was empty. The air had changed. Colder. Heavier. I told myself it was the wind or my mind playing tricks. But when I looked back, the cairn was gone. Completely gone. Just a circle of disturbed soil where it had been. That night, I couldn't sleep. I camped near the river, keeping the fire going until dawn. Every time the wind moved, I thought I heard footsteps. Slow, careful steps circling my tent. Once I heard something breathing just beyond the light. I told myself it was a deer, but the smell was wrong. It was like copper and soil, like something old had been unearthed. In the morning, I packed up and started back toward my car. But the trail had changed. The same trees, the same moss, but the path split where it shouldn't have. I followed the one that felt right, but it led me to another cairn. This one was broken, stones scattered like teeth, and in the middle of them was a shoe. A woman's shoe. Red. Weathered by time, but unmistakable. When I finally made it out, I went straight to the police in Bennington. They took the shoe, but they didn't seem surprised. The officer just nodded slowly and said, "We get things like that every few years, usually after the thaw." I asked him if he believed in the predator. He didn't answer. He just said, "Some stories don't need believers, they just need victims."
Later, I learned that the red shoe had been compared to a photo from 1946, the same kind of shoe Paula Weldon wore on her last day. The lab couldn't confirm it, but the resemblance was haunting, almost perfect. After that, I couldn't let it go. I started researching other forest disappearances. The strange thing is, it's not just Vermont. It's everywhere. The Smoky Mountains, Yosemite, Crater Lake, even deep in Alaska. People vanish in national parks every year, leaving behind no trace, no scent, no struggle. And every time the reports mention the same details: sudden silence, confusion, lost time. Some witnesses even claim they saw a figure, tall, humanoid, covered in something that reflected the trees like glass, as if the forest itself was walking. That's where the modern name came from, the predator. A shape that blends with the woods, moving where light can't catch it. Some say it's a spirit born from the mountain. Others think it's something older, something not human at all. But what if it's something simpler? What if the predator isn't a creature? What if it's the place, the forest itself, alive, aware, and hungry for those who walk too deep inside? Maybe the cairns aren't warnings. Maybe they're traps. Maybe every stone marks the spot where someone disappeared, and the mountain is still counting. Even now, years later, I still dream about that night, about the breathing outside the tent, about the voice that whispered my name in the dark. I never told anyone what it said after that, because when I turned my flashlight toward the sound, the forest was empty. But the voice came again, closer this time, and it said, "You shouldn't have looked." The Second Witness.
Some locals think the predator isn't a creature, but a guardian, a thing that keeps people from uncovering something ancient hidden beneath the soil. Others believe it's a manifestation of the forest itself, feeding on fear, on lost souls, on the energy of those who disappear. But Anna had another theory, one that still chills me. She said it wasn't from here, that it had come through something, a crack between worlds, and Glastonbury Mountain was where that crack opened. At first, I dismissed it as trauma, but then I found something strange buried in a state archive, an old mining report from 1898. It mentioned a collapse near Glastonbury, where 3 workers were never recovered. The foreman's note described the rock structure as not like any known formation and said the walls of the mine reflected light in strange patterns like liquid metal. The mine was sealed and abandoned. A year later, the entire town of Glastonbury emptied out after a flood and a string of unexplained deaths. No one ever returned. I began to wonder, what if that mine wasn't just a collapse? What if it opened something that was never meant to be opened? The more I read, the clearer the pattern became. Disappearances clustered around old mining zones, cave systems, and underground rivers. Places where the earth wasn't solid. Places that swallowed sound. One night while reviewing Anna's voice recording, I heard something in the background, a faint whisper beneath her words. I slowed it down, cleaned the audio, and played it again. It wasn't an echo. It was another voice, deep, almost mechanical. And it said, "Still watching." That was when I stopped sleeping well, when I started hearing things in my own house. At first it was soft, a tap at the window, a shuffle on the porch, then whispers in the static whenever I turned on my recorder. Always the same phrase, "Still watching." I told myself it was my imagination, but imagination doesn't leave footprints in the snow outside your door. It doesn't leave stones stacked neatly on your windowsill, and it doesn't whisper your name when you're alone. The investigator's descent. The morning light filtered through the windows of the motel room where I sat, still shaken from the recording with Anna. I had booked a car and driven back to Vermont, drawn by one question: what exactly happened in those woods around Glastonbury Mountain? I arrived in the nearby town of Bennington, not far from the forests. The locals were polite, but guarded. One bartender at the Maple Street Tavern offered a quiet nod when I asked about the mountain, then turned his gaze back to his polish rag. He said, "People go there to hike. Some never come back." And he changed the subject. I visited the local museum and found an old map of Glastonbury town. Mostly foundations, charcoal kilns, forgotten tracks of railroad. The town had once been logged, charcoaled, and then abandoned. The mining era wasn't large-scale like the gold rush, but the charcoal production and railroad operations left deep scars. The history whispered of economic boom, collapse, and abandonment. But in the papers, I found a curious report from 1898. A flood had washed out the railroad tracks that served South Glastonbury, ending the resort town experiment. The ruin of infrastructure meant the town collapsed. Then, decades later, from 1945 to 1950, several people vanished in that region. It occurred to me that the disappearance phenomenon and the town's death were not separate stories. This place had layers of abandonment, failure, ruin, and nature reclaiming. The forest took what remained. That evening, I hiked the trail up Glastonbury Mountain. The path was thin, marked faintly with roots and moss, and the wind whispered in the treetops. At one clearing, I found an old railroad ties half buried in soil. Nearby, moss-covered kilns lay like tombs of the industry that once was. I stood among those ruins and considered, what if the collapse of the industrial age left a wound in the land, a wound that something intangible now used? As dusk approached, I set up camp near one of the abandoned kiln sites. The rocks glowed silver in the fading sun. I studied the cairns there, stones arranged in a small spiral, half hidden among ferns. I took notes and photographs. I thought, what if those cairns weren't just trail markers, but memorials, or even signposts for something? Night came, and with it a pressure in the air. I heard a twig snap outside my tent. I sat up, flashlight in hand. The beam caught something, a shimmer far ahead between two trees. A figure moving, or just a trick of light? I froze. The figure halted, like it had noticed me noticing. Then it melted into the tree line. When I approached the spot, the ground was undisturbed, except for footprints following off towards the dense forest. They weren't human tracks. They didn't look like boot prints. They were narrow, elongated, toeless, and they vanished at the edge of an old charcoal kiln foundation. I woke the next morning with a heavy heart. I packed quickly, and as I stepped into the early light, the forest exhaled a sigh. I found my camera missing from the tent floor. Only the strap remained. My sleep logs showed I'd been awake several times, heart racing. In the folder of my digital recorder, I found a file labeled 000231.wave. It captured a faint voice whispering my name, Michael, Michael. I never heard that voice before. I don't know if I said my own name out loud in my sleep. Back in Bennington, I reported these findings to the local ranger station. The ranger listened with polite interest. He told me, "We know the terrain is dangerous. Old logging roads collapse, people wander off. But we don't investigate every missing hiker as foul play." I asked him about the disappearances in the 1940s. He said those remain unsolved. The files are stored away. He gave no judgment. That night, back in my motel room, I reviewed old investigation records. Files on Paula Jean Weldon, Mitty Rivers, and others. The patterns stood out. Experienced outdoorsmen, calm weather, no struggle signals, no bodies. A high percentage vanished without trace. The locals call it the Triangle, the region around Glastonbury.
Then I discovered something else, a partial government memo from the Vermont State Police Archives, handwritten, faded, dated 1947. It recommended expanded logging road mapping and warned of unexplained losses in the Glastonbury area. The phrasing, "Trails may lead into terrain where normal searchers cannot follow. Possibility of collapse into old mine workings unknown." But the page was crossed out. Clearly someone didn't want the file to expand. My pulse quickened at the thought. An old mine, abandoned, perhaps a void in the earth, a crack. What if those lost hikers fell into something hidden? Or worse, what if the predator uses those voids as its realm? That same night, I went back to the camp location. I carried only a headlamp and recorder. The moon was low. I followed the railroad bed path until the trees grew tall and black. There, I found a narrow gap in the undergrowth. Maybe the old road to the kiln, maybe a forgotten trail. I followed it until it ended at a deep depression in the ground. The edge was overgrown, but I could see a rusted iron beam jutting out, half buried. It looked like a collapsed shaft entrance. I crouched, shone the light down. I couldn't see the bottom. It looked endless. Moss crumbled under my knees. At the edge, I found footprints, narrow, bootless, elongated. My headlamp flickered. I felt vertigo. I pulled back, heart pounding, and ran. When I reached the cairns near camp, I saw one stone had been turned on its side, exposing a hollow underneath. Inside was a small piece of red cloth, faded, torn. It looked like part of a jacket. I recognized the shade, the same bright red taken by Paula Weldon on her last hike. I sat by the fire that night, notebook and recorder in hand. I didn't sleep. When dawn came, I packed and left. But I left changed. I realize now the predator isn't just a myth. It's not just a creature. It isn't just human error. It merges them. It uses the place, the collapsed railroad, the abandoned mining shafts, the dark woods as part of its method.
Those who wander too deep don't just disappear, they become part of the terrain. And the terrain, in turn, remembers. If you listen, you can hear it. The stones shifting, the footsteps that don't follow boots, the whisper of your own name in the dark. Tonight, I prepare for part 4, the final act. I will return to the mountain with one goal: find the shaft, find the truth, or vanish into the map of shadows myself. The return to Glastonbury. I returned to Glastonbury 2 weeks later, after studying every scrap of record I could find. The old newspaper clippings, missing person notices, and historical maps of the Bennington Triangle. The forest felt different this time. The air was colder, heavier. I wasn't coming back as a journalist anymore. I was coming back as prey who wanted to understand the predator. On my way north from Bennington, I stopped at a small antique bookstore. The owner, an old woman with cloudy eyes, handed me a weathered book without saying a word. Its title read, "Whispers of the Green Mountains." Inside, someone had underlined a passage in faint red ink. The mountain does not kill, it reclaims. Those who vanish are not lost, they are taken back into the root. I asked her where she got the book. She smiled faintly and said, "People trade stories. Sometimes the stories trade back." Then she refused payment. That phrase, "taken back into the root," echoed in my head as I hiked into the forest that evening. The trail was silent, as if the air itself was waiting. No birds, no wind, just that strange stillness that hums louder than any sound. By nightfall, I reached the old kiln site again. My tent from last trip was gone. Only the rope loops I'd tied to nearby trees remained, snapped clean. I built a new fire and placed my recorder near the cairn that had been disturbed before. Then I started to speak, not as an investigator, but as someone inviting something unseen to listen. I said softly, "Whatever you are, I followed your stories. I've seen your marks. If you want to show yourself, I'm here." The woods didn't answer. Not at first. Hours passed. The fire sank to embers. I must have dozed off, because when I opened my eyes, the forest was glowing faintly green. At first I thought it was moonlight through mist. Then I realized the light was beneath the ground. Faint veins of luminescence running under the soil, like roots of light pulsing deep within the mountain. I followed it to the shaft I had seen before, the old collapsed mine entrance. The green light flickered faintly from below, as if something was moving through the tunnels beneath me. Then I heard it, the sound of breathing. Slow, deep, like the earth itself exhaling. I whispered, "Who are you?" The answer came as a vibration under my feet, a low, resonant hum. Not a word, but a sound that felt like it was in my bones. I stumbled backward and my light flickered again. When it steadied, I saw something near the tree line. A figure, crouched low, watching me. Its outline shimmered in a distortion of light, like heat rising off asphalt. It tilted its head, almost curious. Then, in the distance, I heard another sound, a faint voice calling. A woman's voice. It said, "Help me." The voice was coming from the shaft. I hesitated, frozen between two choices, follow the voice or run. And in that hesitation, the figure vanished, melting back into the trees without a sound. The whispering began again, not from one direction, but all around, 1,000 soft voices, like wind slipping through reeds. "Michael, Michael." The ground trembled. My recorder clicked off on its own. My flashlight died. In the darkness, I felt something brush against my hand, cold, wet, like the touch of roots. I pulled away and ran stumbling through the trees until I found the faint line of the old trail. By the time I reached the clearing, the night had gone still again. No voices, no light, just silence. At dawn, I checked my recorder. The file was still there, 12 minutes of static and faint breathing, but near the end, just before it cuts off, A single sentence can be heard low and distorted. The mountain remembers your name. Back in town, I tried to share my findings with the local ranger office. They wouldn't let me in. They said the area was now under restricted investigation due to recent accidents. When I asked what kind of accidents, the ranger just said, "You should leave Vermont." I returned to my motel and opened my laptop, but my folders were gone. Every file about the case, deleted. The audio, the photos, the map scans, everything. Only one folder remained, named Root. Inside was a single image, a photo of me, sleeping in my tent, taken from above. My heart froze. I never took that picture. I checked the metadata. It was timestamped the same night I'd heard the whispering. There was also a short audio clip hidden inside the image data. When played, it said 3 words in that same whispering tone: "You came back." That was the moment I realized the predator doesn't just live in the woods. It follows you. It knows your name. It knows where you sleep. Some legends grow teeth when you stare at them too long. And some stories stop being stories the moment you decide to believe. I packed my things and left Vermont that morning, driving without direction. But even on the open highway, surrounded by light, I still felt the forest watching.
At the next gas station, I noticed a missing person flyer on the bulletin board. A man in his 30s. Dark hair, glasses. Missing since last week. His name was Michael Graves. My name. The last transmission. 3 days after leaving Vermont, I started receiving messages. Unknown numbers, no text, just audio files. Each one about 30 seconds long, all static, heavy breathing, and in the distance, that same whisper looping my name. At first I thought someone was playing a trick. Maybe someone found my lost recorder. But then I listened closer. In one of the clips, under the static, you could hear my voice. It was me saying, "I think I see it. It's standing behind the kiln." Those were words I had never spoken out loud. I tried to trace the sender, but the files came from random temporary servers, locations scattered across the country, even outside the US. Every night, more arrived, each one a little clearer, each one sounding closer. The final message was different. It contained coordinates, latitude and longitude. When I entered them into Google Maps, it pointed back to where it all began, the clearing near the collapsed mine on Glastonbury Mountain. For hours, I stared at the map, convincing myself not to go. But in the end, I had to know. 2 days later, I was back in Vermont. The forest was colder now, wrapped in fog so thick it felt like breathing glass. My hands shook as I followed the overgrown road back toward the ruins. The cairns were still there, though rearranged. Someone, or something, had built new ones, smaller, scattered like breadcrumbs leading toward the shaft. I followed. At the edge of the depression, I found my missing camera buried halfway in the mud. Its lens cracked, but the battery still held charge. I turned it on. The screen flickered, showing corrupted footage, lines, shapes, then a figure, human-shaped, but translucent, like a reflection without a source. Behind it, faint outlines of other faces, overlapping, trapped in the image. I pressed play on the oldest file. The video showed the forest at night, my tent, my fire, then a shadow passing directly in front of the camera. Not walking, gliding. The static deepened and a voice whispered through the speaker. "It feeds on attention. The more you speak its name, the more it learns your shape. I dropped the camera. Something moved behind me. Branches snapped. A faint hum filled the air. Not mechanical, not human. More like vibration from inside the ground. The soil beneath my feet began to pulse with that same green glow I had seen before. I turned toward the shaft. The air above it shimmered, distorting light like heat. The outline of something massive moved below the surface. Unseen but undeniable. It was breathing again. I should have run, but instead, I took one step closer. The wind stopped. The forest fell completely silent. Then a single voice spoke, not in my ears, but in my mind. You came looking for truth. Truth looks back. The next sound was my own recorder, clicking on, by itself. It began to capture everything. My breathing, my footsteps, the faint rumble beneath the ground. And then another sound joined. Hundreds of overlapping whispers merging into one long, low word. Stay. The ground gave way beneath me. I fell. Darkness swallowed everything. Cold, wet, endless. My body hit something soft, like soil, but alive. I reached out and my hand touched fabric. When I turned my light, I saw what it was. Clothes. Thousands of pieces. Torn jackets, boots, hats, bags, all half buried in mud, all belonging to the missing. Then I saw faces. Faint, pale, almost printed into the dirt itself. They weren't decayed. They weren't human anymore. They were absorbed, part of the walls, part of the roots, part of the mountain. Their eyes moved when I looked at them, and one of them had my face. The flashlight flickered and I heard the recorder beep. Its battery was dying. In its final seconds, I whispered into the mic, the only words I could muster. If you find this recording, don't follow me. Don't say its name. Don't look for the predator. Then the recorder clicked off. The file that shouldn't exist. 6 months later, the U.S. Forest Service announced the closure of a restricted ecological area near Glastonbury Mountain. No further details were released. In local forums, some users reported hearing strange noises near the border, whispers at night, like voices calling from underground. Hikers who ignored the warnings sometimes vanished for days, only to return with no memory of where they'd been. Some spoke of dreams where the forest had faces. Last month, an anonymous drive appeared on a dark web forum dedicated to unsolved mysteries. It contained a single folder named /predator. Inside were dozens of audio files, all static and heavy breathing, and one short Dex document dated the same week I disappeared. It read, "The mountain remembers all who speak of it. And now, you have." The Hunter's Journal. My name is Daniel Reyes. I'm not a journalist or a writer. I'm a retired park ranger. I worked for the U.S. Forest Service for nearly 30 years, most of that time spent around the Green Mountains of Vermont. When I left the service in 2019, I thought I was done with that place. But 2 months ago, I received a package with no return address. Inside was an old digital recorder, a cracked camera, and a memory card labeled Michael Graves Field Recordings. I didn't recognize the name at first. Then I remembered. There had been a small online rumor back in 2016 about a journalist who vanished while investigating the Bennington Triangle. The authorities called it an accident. Hikers said he just got lost. The package arrived on the anniversary of his disappearance. At first, I dismissed it as a prank, but curiosity has teeth. I connected the card to my laptop and opened the folder. There were 32 audio files, each one more disturbing than the last. Static, heavy breathing, faint voices, the sound of running through leaves. Then toward the end, I heard a whisper I'll never forget. The mountain remembers your name. I've heard a lot of strange things in the woods, but that voice chilled me. It didn't sound recorded. It sounded alive. I decided to investigate quietly on my own. No one in law enforcement wanted to touch the case. They said the mountain was unsafe. Landslides, erosion, blah, blah, blah. But I have walked that terrain for decades. I know the difference between danger and fear. I left early in the morning, carrying only a recorder, GPS, and my old field notebook. As I entered the restricted zone, I noticed the forest had changed. The soil was softer, darker, and the smell was wrong. Sweet like decay mixed with pine sap. 1 mile in, I found the first cairn. Then another. Then another. Each one built with careful symmetry. Perfectly balanced stones forming a spiral pattern. At the center of the spiral was a small red cloth fragment, half buried in dirt.
I reached down to touch it. The instant my fingers brushed the fabric, my GPS lost signal. Every coordinate went blank. I stood there in silence as the woods around me went still. No birds, no wind, just that suffocating silence that eats the world whole. Then my recorder turned on by itself. A voice came through, faint but unmistakable. "Daniel, you came back." I froze. No one should have known I was there. I looked around. Nothing. But I could feel something moving behind the trees, like the air itself had weight. I followed the cairns deeper into the forest until I reached the old charcoal kiln. It was cracked open like a wound. The stones were slick with moss, and the ground pulsed faintly beneath them. When I stepped closer, I heard breathing, deep and slow, coming from below the kiln floor. I raised my flashlight and saw the outline of a tunnel leading downward. It looked freshly unearthed, as if the forest itself had been digging from below. I thought of turning back, but I remembered Michael Graves, and I remembered the missing. I climbed down. The tunnel twisted for maybe 50 feet before opening into a cavern lined with roots, but they weren't normal roots. They looked human. Fingers, arms, limbs, all tangled into the walls, moving ever so slightly like they were still alive. At the center of the chamber stood something like a column made of earth and flesh. Inside it, faintly visible beneath the roots, was a human face, eyes open, mouth moving. It whispered, "The predator feeds, the mountain keeps." I stumbled back, tripping over something half buried in the dirt, a bag. I pulled it free. Inside were dozens of memory cards, each labeled with names and dates. Weldon, Rivers, Fay, Graves. I realized then what the legend meant. The mountain remembers wasn't a metaphor, it was a warning. Everything taken by the predator becomes part of it. Every person, every sound, every memory. I ran. I don't know how long. When I finally emerged from the forest, the sun was rising, but my recorder was gone. Only the red cloth remained in my hand. That night, back at home, I plugged the camera into my laptop again. New files had appeared, footage I hadn't recorded. The timestamp was from that same morning. It showed me, standing in the forest, staring blankly ahead. Behind me, a figure, tall, translucent, its shape distorting the trees like rippling glass, leaning close to my ear. And then, in a voice identical to mine, it whispered, "You're part of it now." The final note. It's been 3 weeks since I came back. Every night, I hear movement outside my window. Sometimes I wake up with dirt under my fingernails. Sometimes I find small piles of stones stacked neatly by my door. The pattern always forms a spiral. I've stopped sleeping. The whispering has grown louder. It doesn't sound angry, just patient. I'm leaving this journal behind for whoever finds it. If you hear the name The Predator, if you feel drawn to the forest, don't go looking. Because once you know its story, it knows yours. And once it knows your name, it never forgets. I saw that, Liam. It does sound spectacular. A real Parisian icon, known for its dazzling beauty and romantic atmosphere.
Wow, I wish we could teleport there right now. Imagine zipping from museum to museum, hitting all the patisseries and seeing every single arrondissement.
It certainly has its appeal, rushing to see everything, but there are also benefits to a more relaxed pace, you know? We could just wander through Le Marais, discover little cafes, and really soak in the city.
But wouldn't you ever want the thrill of a Pack Day Tourary? To conquer all the major sites and feel like we've truly done Paris?
Perhaps for a day, my friend. But for the most part, I'm looking forward to savoring the moments. And who knows, maybe I'll discover the best croissant in a tiny, hidden bakery while you're scaling the Arc de Triomphe.
Maybe you will, Chloe, and maybe I'll bring you back a macaron from the top of Montmartre.
That sounds like a delicious peace offering. Until then, enjoy your meticulous planning, Liam.
I will, Chloe. Thanks for dreaming with me.